Hey guys, so in today's video, we are going to be taking a look at why people hate Congress. And when I say hate Congress, I mean why they often get frustrated with the way that Congress functions and some of the more, not shady practices, but some of the questionable and more controversial practices that Congress is a part of, as well as public opinion. So those are all the things we're going to be taking a look at. Now, I want to start the video off talking about the incumbency advantage. And we've started talking about this a little bit when we talked about the election process and campaigning and things like that. But just as a reminder, an incumbent is someone who is already holding office and is running for re-election. Now, as we've heard and know that there are no term limits in Congress. So there are 2-year terms in the House of Representatives and 6-year terms in the Senate. So yes, they only serve for those number of terms, but unlike the President of the United States, senators and House of Representative members are not banned from running again and again and again and again. Now, I wanted to talk about very quickly here just some data that I have from 2016. So these are showing you some of the data on the incumbents from that election. So in the House of Representatives, 393 of the 435 sought re-election. 380 won re-election. That is a total success rate of 97%, which is astronomically large. In the Senate, we see a very similar number, right? And similar results. 29 sought re-election, 27 won. That is a 93% total success rate of incumbents. And this process even goes down at the state level with governors as well. You can see 80% here. Now, part of the reason why people feel that the incumbency is an issue in Congress is that, and this cartoon kind of discusses this complaint, is that being an incumbent means that you have been rooted into the system through power and corruption, right? So this cartoon is arguing for term limits because yes, it might look easy to uproot an incumbent, but in reality, they are rooted into the system. They're staying put by the corruption and power that has led them to that position. Now, some of the advantages that people, especially those in favor of a cartoon like the one from before, cite are something like franking privileges as an advantage. And this is ultimately really free postage, free mailing, free postage. And it's like, okay, who cares? But when it comes to running for an office, right, as we know, you have to campaign. As an incumbent, you are saving money because you don't have to pay for the mailing, the postage of all of those things that you have to send out to get your name out there for the rest of the world. So you also get free trips to your home district, your state. So you are already getting your name out there even more so than it already is. Now, as an incumbent, you also face weak and underprepared opposition oftentimes. Your opponents are often inexperienced at running campaigns in general. They might be unorganized, meaning they don't know what to use their funds for specifically. They don't know who to reach in terms of campaigning themselves. And they also are underfunded as well. And that gives us or gets us to another advantage of fundraising, right? It would be easier for you as an incumbent to raise money. You're a proven winner, right? You can take credit for the good things that you have done while you're in office. So you are going to be more likely to have money given to you by PACs, super PACs, individuals, citizens, etc., etc. Now, we've talked about this concept of log rolling in our last video on the bill to law process, but it is an advantage as well, right? As an incumbent, you can network. You know who's in office. You can exchange favors, reciprocally, vote for other bills in exchange for your bills to get voted on. And this then leads to continued claiming of, the good things that have happened while you are in office. Now, another advantage to being an incumbent, and especially an incumbent of the majority party, is something called gerrymandering. And I have more to come soon on this slide because I don't want to get into it right now because I actually have 2 slides here in just a second that we'll take a look at. But that is another advantage that comes with being an incumbent. Now, I want to talk about another reason why people get frustrated with Congress, and these are legislative add-ons. Now, there are things called pork barrel spending measures and earmarks. Now, these pork barrel spending measures are basically projects and grants of money that are collected for the sole purpose of bringing money into a representative's home district. And these funds of a bill are directed for a very specific purpose. For example, building a senior citizen center in a legislator's district. And then the spending that comes from that pork barrel legislation is an earmark or a rider. Okay. Now, members of Congress try to send these federal funds back to their home districts. And I know it's cheesy, but the quote is to bring home the bacon, so to speak, for the people that they represent. Now, something that really gets people frustrated is that often these pork barrel legislative measures and earmarks are often added in the last minute to avoid debate on them. Okay. Now, the constituents, obviously, who are in that legislator's district benefit, and they appreciate these earmarks and this spending, but that has led to a negative reputation. And as you might think, right, we've talked about riders before, right? These don't necessarily have to be specific to the original bill. So I have an example of pork barrel spending and earmarks here. And this is the case of the Bridge to Nowhere from Alaskan Senator Ted Stevens. Now, he originally had a bill whose primary purpose was to fund and provide armor for U.S. troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, he added a rider, or an earmark, to this bill that called for sending $400 million to his state to build a bridge to connect the Alaska mainland to an island with 60 inhabitants. So as you can see, this is bringing money back into his district, which is the state of Alaska, and it's not related to that original bill at all. So this is where a lot of people get frustrated with Congress's behavior. Right? And log rolling can also be considered a legislative add-on, right? Maybe not an add-on in the present sense, but in the future, right? You're trading those votes to gain support for a bill in the future. Now, another reason why people get frustrated with Congress would be intensifying partisanship and gridlock, which we've talked about quite a bit. Gridlock and then divided government. So I think this political cartoon kind of sums up this argument very well, right? What we did this summer by Congress, it's blank, the end, right? Not a lot seems to get done in the eyes of the public. Now, often when I'm talking about partisanship, right, it's this idea that people are so far right, so far left, no one can compromise, and we just stay stuck and nothing can get passed, especially in a divided government where the two chambers of Congress may be controlled by different parties, or maybe Congress in itself is one party, but the presidency is controlled by another. And this has led to bitter election contests, even bitter debate surrounding bills on the floors of the House and Senate, even between the president and Congress when it comes to executive orders, signing bills, and things like that. Now, something that has resulted from this that also gets people frustrated is something that is called party line voting, right? And people do this all the time, like we talked about in voting trends, but party line voting among Congress is more common than ever. So much so that straying from party positions has become dangerous for those interested in re-election, right? You want to prove that you stand with your party, otherwise you might fear not, or you might lose, being endorsed by someone of your party. All right, guys, so the last thing that we are going to talk about in this video are reapportionment, redistricting, and gerrymandering. And these terms, I feel like, are often mistaken for the same thing. They are related, but they are not quite the same. So what we're going to start with is, first and foremost, please know that this is referring to and affecting the House of Representatives only, because this is dealing with population. And the House of Representatives is our chamber of Congress that is based on the the population of states. So just keep that in mind. Now, the first thing that we need to talk about is reapportionment. And reapportionment occurs every 10 years after the United States Census. So in 2021, after that 2020 census was taken, they've collected data, which I'll show you in a second, that leads to reapportionment. And seats at this point, every 10 years, in the House are reapportioned or redistributed based on changes in population. So we know that there are 435 members of the House that has been frozen since 1929 by law. So that number stays the same. But as the population of people in states changes, right, it increases or decreases, the number of representatives in each state changes. And this redistribution is known as reapportionment. So I wanted to show you guys, this is the changes that is or are occurring because of the 2020 census. So for example, take a look at Ohio. We don't have quite enough data yet, so that's why there are some questionable, like 7 or 8, 52 or 53. So just looking at this actual map of the United States, you can kind of see where the changes happened in our country. So this is a reapportionment map. As you can see, Texas gained 3 seats. They now have 39 representatives. Whereas Ohio, we had 16, but our population went down. So it was reapportioned so that we have 15 seats, or at least they're predicting 15 seats. Right? So not always, it's not a given that states will, have to be reapportioned, but it definitely is a possibility. Now, redistricting itself, once the representatives have been reapportioned, right? We've determined the number of representatives that are in a state. We need to then figure out the districts that they represent. So the group, the people in charge of doing what is called this redistricting, this redrawing of district lines, because of this new population total, that is the state legislature. So, for example, the Ohio House and Senate work to create and redraw these new district lines. So ultimately, the party in power is who determines in this state legislature the new map of congressional districts. It's up to them to decide where those lines fall, and as we will kind of see, who falls in the borders of these districts. And they're trying to draw these districts to benefit their party, so that they can have people reelected in the following elections for the next 10 years, since that's how long these districts are in place for. Now, there are a couple of rules that go into these districts. They can't just do it randomly without, guidelines. These have been instituted by law and by Supreme Court rulings, which we'll kind of take a look at in class. But districts need to be equal in population, okay? Relatively equal. Of course, you can't have exact number. So the courts have determined between 640 and 650,000 people must reside in each district. Districts must be connected or contiguous, right? Like you can't have, a section of a district here, another district cutting through it, and then the other part of the district over here. They must connect to one another. And districts must be relatively compact. Now that is relative, right? What exactly is compact? And as we will see, state legislatures often try to kind of fudge this compactness. Once the state legislature redistricts and we have new district lines, it's ultimately up to the governor to then sign off on the new districts. And as we will see, this plan, these maps, can be challenged in the courts. Now, interestingly, the Supreme Court did refuse involvement in looking in cases of redistricting, and as we will see, gerrymandering, until the 1950s, the 1960s, if I could read. Because remember, when we talk about the judicial branch, the Supreme Court doesn't hear cases that are politically or partisan based, right? Their goal is to be that neutral, independent body of the government. Now, it was decided with the court case Baker versus Carr, which is one of your required court cases, and we'll look at this more in class, that the Supreme Court changed its mind. And this opened the door for the Supreme Court to play a role in making legislative districts as democratic as possible. And we'll look at a little bit more detail in class so that we can, go over this and give you guys the specifics. But ultimately, this is where we get something that's called the one person, one vote doctrine. Each individual has to be weighted equally in legislative apportionment and when we are redistricting. So these are the congressional districts in Ohio. So the census data is gathered every 10 years, and it usually takes about 2 years for congressional districts to be adopted. So these are our districts through 2022. As you can see, the range or the size of these districts, excuse me if you can hear my dog in the background barking, you can see the size of these districts ranges, right? Look at this tiny district here, District 3, super small. But then you have District 6 over here in Eastern Ohio, right? That is all the way up here, all of these counties, right? There are 640 to 650,000 people that live in this area, and the same thing here. Now, as I mentioned, they have to be connected. And I know that our district, right, we're over here in District 1, this doesn't look connected, but guess what, guys? It is. This little area right here is what makes this legal and constitutional, because that is a technical connection. So as you can see, districts are not often drawn to be, right, nice geometric shapes. And there's reason for that often. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is all of this reapportionment, redistricting leads us to gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is redistricting where districts are drawn illogically, right? It doesn't seem to be rhyme or reason besides to give an advantage to one party. And this is known as partisan gerrymandering. And usually this is done to benefit an incumbent, which we talked about at the beginning of this video. So just to show you guys, I know this is a little dated, but these are maps, hypothetical maps, a nonpartisan, as well as a gerrymandered Ohio. Okay, so this is the map, if you guys can think back to the last slide, that we currently have. This would be a hypothetically drawn, nonpartisan district map of Ohio. So you see that the predicted outcome, here would have 6 Democratic districts, okay? And then we would have 9 Republican, and then 1 toss-up. So, just based on where cities fall, where voters fall, our population is, this is the predicted outcome of this election. Now, because the Ohio legislature is, controlled by the Republican Party, this is the map that we have. So as you can see, what they did was they moved districts around so that the people living in the districts tend to vote more Republican. So in the gerrymandered version of Ohio, we have 12 Republican districts instead of 9, and 4 Democratic districts instead of 6. Okay? So you can see that it is definitely beneficial to have your party in the state legislature. And I think Cincinnati is a good example of this. We are in District 1. So hypothetically, this is our district. Cincinnati lies in this district here. And this is a Democratic area because, we've talked about, voting trends. Urban areas tend to be more liberal Democratic. But if you take a look down here, this map, right, has been gerrymandered to include all of this area along with the city of Cincinnati, which makes it Republican instead. Now, final thing that I want to talk about, our last topic here, and that is racial gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering is the intentional drawing of districts on the basis of race. And this was first used to dilute the votes of African Americans, especially during Reconstruction after the Civil War. And even though, the 1950s and 60s, this was found to violate the 15th Amendment voting rights of the American citizen. And in recent years, this gerrymandering has been used in what I want to say is kind of a well-intentioned, quote unquote overcorrection of the original problem. So instead of drawing districts based on race to discriminate against a particular race, we were seeing districts gerrymandered based on race to instead benefit that particular minority. So kind of reverse discrimination. We kind of talked about this with affirmative action, positive discrimination. This is kind of the same idea, but with drawing those legislative districts. Instead, now, no matter how neutral politically the gerrymandered district might be, this was found to violate voters' rights to equal protection under the 14th Amendment. And the case Shaw v. Reno, which again, as I've said before, we'll look at in class along with the other court case, this is a court case that ultimately backtracked racial gerrymandering. This case, as we will see, says that race, when considering redistricting, must be held to the strictest of scrutiny under the Equal Protection Clause. So with this case, race ultimately cannot be used to discriminate against people in terms of drawing districts. And race cannot be the only factor that is used when considering drawing these legislative districts. So you have to be very, very careful when it comes to these drawing redistricting. And we'll take a look at this more in class. So just jot down maybe a few ideas, any questions you have about this case or the last one, or gerrymandering and things like that in general. Let me know if you guys have questions, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.